Hello class, how are you today? Here we are again for another lesson, and today we're going to be talking about temperatures. So let me share my screen with you. Here we go. Okay, so let's talk about temperature. The difference in the sunlight affects the temperature at different latitudes. So remember that, for example, the latitudes that are closer to the equator are going to be warmer than the latitudes that are closer to the North Pole or to the South Pole. So remember also that latitudes are the circles north and south parallel to the equator. So over here, follow my cursor. You can see the equator, and then we have parallel to the equator, we have the lines of latitude towards the north, and we have the lines of latitude towards the south. So Earth's temperature patterns change from season to season. So we're going to talk about the zones of latitude. The energy from the sun heats the earth, and that we all know it. And because of the tilt of the earth axis, different areas of the planet receive different amounts of direct sunlight. As a result of that, some regions are warmer than others. So look here in the picture, we have the earth. We know that it's tilted. So certain areas are going to be getting more sun than other areas, okay? For example, here we have the earth as it rotates around the sun, and it's also rotating in its own axis. So as it rotates around the sun, different areas of the planet are going to be getting more sunlight. You can see over here the cycle, how some areas are shaded because they don't get any sunlight, and how some other areas are very bright because they get more sunlight. So this depends on the tilt of the earth axis and on the rotation of earth around the sun and the rotation of earth around its own axis. So the polar zones are also known as high latitudes. They are the areas which are north of the Arctic Circle and south of the Antarctic Circle. You can see it here in the picture. We have the polar zones. In purple, we have the Arctic Circle, and down here we have the Antarctic Circle. In the polar zones, the sun is below the horizon for part of the year, making the days very short and the nights very long. And on the other part of the year, the sun is near the horizon, and this makes the days very long and the nights very short. In fact, at the very, very tip of the poles, right here on the very tip of the Arctic Circle and on the very tip of the Antarctic Circle, half of the year there is only sunlight, and half of the year it's only dark all the time. So the polar zone temperatures stay very cold all the year because they almost don't get any sun from the sunlight. So they stay very cold for the most part of the year. The tropics, or low latitudes, are the areas between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn and the equator. You can see them right here. We have the equator right in the middle of Earth. Then we have the Tropic of Cancer to the north, and we have the Tropic of Capricorn to the south. These two areas in between are the tropics, or the low latitudes. In the low latitudes, the sun is overhead or nearly overhead all year long. So these regions are usually very hot. So look again in the in the picture, where we have the tropics, the low latitudes, right north of the equator up to the Tropic of Cancer, and south of the equator up to the Tropic of Capricorn. Then we have the temperate zones, or the middle latitudes. These are the areas between the Tropic of Cancer and the Arctic Circle in the Northern Hemisphere, and between the Tropic of Capricorn and the Antarctic Circle in the Southern Hemisphere. These zones, the temperate zones, they usually have a hot summer, a cold winter, and a moderate spring or fall. So you can see the temperate zones are over here between the Tropic of Cancer and the Arctic Circle, and between the Tropic of Capricorn and the Antarctic Circle. These are called the temperate zones. Let's talk about seasonal changes in temperature. Then again, because of the tilt of the Earth axis, temperature patterns change from season to season. In January, it is winter in the Northern Hemisphere and summer in the Southern Hemisphere. And in July, it's the other way around. In July, it's winter in the Southern Hemisphere and it's summer in the Northern Hemisphere. Because always keep in mind, remember that the Earth, it's rotating around its own axis, and it's also rotating in an orbit around the sun. So this is what creates the different seasons and the different changes in temperature. And the last thing that we're going to see is, what is altitude? Altitude is the height above sea level. So as altitude increases, the temperatures drop. So the areas of high altitude in the world are cold all year round. Here we have a picture of the Himalayas, which are the highest mountains in the world. Here we have Mount Everest. And all this area, because it's a very, very high altitude, it remains cold all year round, and there's always snow at the top of the mountains. So this is a short class today, but nevertheless, review the lesson again so that you learn and you can keep in mind exactly which are the different zones that we have: the tropical, the temperate, the higher latitudes, and the lower latitudes. So I will see you next time in our next class.